Hi, I'm Everett Kamikawa. I am Teresa's brother-in-law, and I wanted to take a couple of minutes and talk about Dan Nagel. I've known Dan my whole life. I'm the youngest by many years in my family, and Dan learned, well, actually, he taught me a very important lesson at a very early age. In fact, it's one that I think has been passed on to my own son because of Dan. Now, you have to understand that this story takes place starting in the early 1970s, so things were a little different then in terms of our terminology, and I know it's 2021, but please bear with me and you'll get the gist of what I'm talking about, okay? So, as you know, of course, young kids throughout the course of millennia have noticed when things are a little bit different than what they are used to. And when I was 4 or 5, I noticed that Dan didn't really talk like the adults that I was used to hearing. And so I asked my mom why. And my mom explained that Dan's brain was a little different and that he saw the world through that of a 12-year-old. Now, I didn't know what any of that meant, but quite frankly, I didn't care because it wasn't very much longer after that that my sister Linda, who rented an apartment in the Nagel's house, brought home some model boats that Dan was throwing out, and she thought I might like them. Well, the next time I saw Dan, I told him how cool these boats were and how cool the models were, and he thought that that was great. And I didn't care about anything that my mom said because here I have someone that I could talk about models to. And guess what? Dan actually gave me some more model planes and some more model ships that he didn't want. And it wasn't long after that that Dan and his dad had to babysit me when my sister Linda had to go somewhere. And so I just had a blast talking to Dan about the space program, about models, about planes, about astronomy. And it was a great time. And so as a result of that, whenever I saw Dan, I would make it a point to go to talk to him. And of course, Dan had his own family of brothers and sisters, but as they moved away to different parts of the country, Teresa brought Dan to our family events. So I would always make it a point to go and talk with Dan about something. And I think Dan liked being around family. And I think he enjoyed being around people because he always, of course, had something to say about, oh, especially sports and especially movies. And as growing into an adult, I still made sure that I would go and talk with Dan whenever I saw him at a family event. And in fact, many years later, as an adult, I was driving to my work and I happened to pass by a bus stop, and I happened to see Dan standing there. So I pulled over and asked him where he was going and if he needed a ride. And it turns out he said yes, he was going to go to work. So we had a great conversation on the way to his work about where he was working and what he was doing and how he got the job there. And as it turns out, he worked at a hobby shop that I often went to. So whenever I went into that hobby shop after that, and it was quite often, I would ask if Dan was around and I would make sure that I talked with him. And I would even make it a point to ask him to show me wherever it was I was looking for, where it was so that I could get that. And kind of just to, let his manager and his counterpart see him work with customers. And I think Dan really liked people, and I think he liked that opportunity because, after all, we all like to look good in front of our manager, right? And I think they got to see a little bit more, maybe, of a different side of person that Dan was. Because one of the things that I noticed over the years is that I noticed he never swore. I never heard Dan raise his voice, in anger. In fact, I never heard him say an unkind word about anybody. And talk about a great lesson to pass on to the way we adults should act, especially with everything going on now. By the way, that counts for you kids to act the same way, okay? Be nice to everybody. And over the years, I think this lesson and more have been passed on to my son because he has seen how we incorporate Dan into the family and how we make sure to include him in things. And I think that taught him a very important lesson at a very early age, that just because somebody might be a little different than you are doesn't mean that you that they are different. We're all human beings. We're all good people. We're all friendly. And as a result, he has, from a very, very early age, gone on to make sure that he has gone out of his way to be friends with anybody who other kids might consider different than they are, whether they're in a wheelchair, whether they have Down syndrome, whether they have a physical disability, or maybe just some sort of like a speech impediment, something that kids might go, that's a little weird. My son has made it a point to be friends with them, to include them in things, and I think that was a lesson that he saw us with Dan. And so when you look at it, I think Dan has left us two important lessons. One, how to act with each other. And two, that we shouldn't be afraid to make friends with someone just because they might be a little different than we are. And those are two important legacies that I think Dan leaves us.